Meh. He's down.
Good morning, everybody. I'm on my way to the lovely Onega, Kansas this morning to pick up some bale feeders. So you might hear a little bit of the road noise from the old farm truck. You might have noticed in some of the other stories, you hear a little bit of that road noise. And the only time I really have without distractions is on my way to and from work when I'm in the vehicle by myself. So that's what I do. I tell these stories. You might hear this morning that I have a pretty hefty exhaust leak off the right side of the engine on this truck. And you might also hear the sound of a shock absorber that I think is pretty much on its way out. I want to recap my 2021 season. We're about 3 weeks away from the week that Darren and I call Deer Week 2022. So we take a week of vacation together and head to the farm and try to chase some deer. So I'm getting pretty excited. I talked to Darren on the phone last night. He's got a pretty busy schedule, as do I, but at least I'm closer to the farm. So I checked in with him. He's got some shooting matches, some NRL 22 stuff going on here the next couple weekends. It really limits his time. He's pretty vested in that, organizing those matches and helping moderate them. So he's got a lot of stuff going on here in the end of October. So he's not going to have a chance to get back up to the farm. So I checked in with him to see if there's anything he has on his mind that I can do this weekend. I'm going to do a few farm things. We've got a birthday party to get knocked out today, but hopefully there's a chance to run out if I need to. But I think for the most part, we are pretty well settled and ready to go as far as that goes. So we're about 3 weeks away from that second week in November, which we feel is kind of the sweet spot. Hopefully we can catch some rutting action. And I just wanted to recap my 2021 season since it's been almost a full year, and it's one of the seasons that I consider one of my favorites so far. It was just a lot of fun. Leading up to last year's archery season, we'd had a number of cameras out and done some scouting, and the cameras really pulled through for us, capturing some really nice bucks. I would say late summer. I don't remember the exact dates, but they were in velvet and filled out. And one of the cameras that we were watching pretty closely was the Spartan cell camera that we have on our pond dam. That was a kind of a crossroads and a pinch point. It brought the deer down to the dam where they crossed across that little valley or ravine. And so that captured quite a few different deer going through there. And there were just a few there that really caught our attention. One in particular that I decided to kind of make my target buck. He was a really heavy, a lot of mass, a nice framed 8-point. From the pictures, it was kind of hard to get a good angle at it because they're either quartering to the camera or quartering away as they go by that camera. So you had to kind of guess at maybe what width they were going to be and that sort of thing. But just the mass spoke to a older, mature deer, and I'll take that any day. So that was kind of, in my mind, my target deer, although we knew there were several others out there running around that we wouldn't hesitate to shoot. And then another deer that comes to play into this story was a deer that had spaded out double brow tines, and he was kind of intriguing. And again, the pictures that we had of him, it was kind of hard to identify what size he really was and maybe even how old of a deer he was, but he was certainly interesting. We seem to have quite a few deer from year to year that pass on those double brow tines, so that's pretty interesting and kind of fun to see those deer. So we had some deer on our mind going into that rutcation week there. Oh, there's some deer crossing the road there. Get out of the way. So we were pretty excited and ready to see what might actually show up there to our tree stand locations. One of the things that we had done in preparation to all of this, since that pond dam was kind of a pinch point, we decided to get a tree stand tucked in pretty close to that so we could watch what was coming across there. We figured that as bucks were moving across the farm, they would utilize that pond dam, and there was one fence crossing that they would hop over, and we stationed a stand right into it's actually a honey locust tree. Cleared the thorns off the tree, poked the ladder stand up in there, but it was kind of a little grove of trees, a bunch of cedar trees tucked in there. The stand was in the honey locust, so you got kind of splitting limbs across the back of you to break up your outline. More cedars directly behind you, so pretty thick back cover, and then some cedars and Osage orange or hedge trees in the front of it. And we whittled out a few shooting lanes kind of off to the side and to the front, but the main one was going to be to the front and a little bit to the right where that fence crossing was. So if deer were coming across the pond dam, they'd come across in front of the camera, hop the fence right into the shooting lane, or if they were coming from the other direction, it'd just be opposite that, so they would enter the shooting lane before they got to the fence crossing. So that was a pretty good spot, and that was on my mind as my setup for the week. So November rolls around and we have our vacation approaching, and unfortunately the weather took a turn for the worst as far as hunting goes. It got really warm, and this had happened the previous year. We have to put in for our vacation days pretty early, and so we can't always bet on the weather. We just have to count on hitting a few days within that week that we might have a cool down or a cold front move through and have some good rut activity. So again, this year, 2021, the same thing happened. We had above normal daytime temperatures. It would cool off fairly well at night, but no real weather movement, no good cold fronts moving through at that point. So we were kind of bummed about that. And we just decided, well, to kind of sit out anyway and see what we can see moving. So Darren hit the stand to the east along Deer Canyon and the Green Gate stand. There's a cluster of kind of 3 stands off to that area that he could move around different winds, or depending on what he was seeing in different areas. That's a real tough place to hunt, really. Kind of gamble on which stand to pick. But anyway, that was where he was going to focus his efforts. We'd had some decent pictures over there. He'd set up one of the Tacticam cell cameras on that end and watching a scrape. So he was going to watch that. He was going to have an easy shot from a couple of those stands to a scrape that the camera was set up on, and then if the wind changed, he could hop across the field to another location where he'd seen quite a few deer from in past years. So that was his setup, and I was going to focus on that pond dam stand. It was going to be decent for multiple winds because everything pinched down. If you have a kind of a south or southwest wind, it's going to blow your scent out toward a cattle lot, or what we call the cow lot, and so that's where we winter our cattle. Not many deer are going to move through there. And then if the wind is out of the west or northwest, it's going to cast your scent across the pond before it hits the pasture opposite. That wouldn't be necessarily ideal because I think there's bedding back in there, but it would get across the property line and far enough out, hopefully, that wouldn't mess up anything. But multiple winds would possibly give you an opportunity at a shot for the way our shooting lanes were set up for that stand. So I was just going to hunker down there, and we didn't really have anything patterned per se, but we knew that it was a pinch point and took a gamble on a deer within that 7-day, or it's actually more like 10-day period if you count the weekends. We were just counting on the buck eventually coming through there, and you just had to be there consistently enough to catch him. So that was my plan. With the warmer weather, it proved to be really slow that week. I didn't see much activity at all. The one deer that was probably the most visible was that split brow tine or double brow tine buck. The interesting thing about him, I think Darren spotted him first, and he was showing up on the camera that Darren had placed on that scrape. He had done some kind of licking around. There was a branch that, I think it was a storm damaged branch, kind of fell down, and I think this is why the scrape was there. The branch fell down almost at a 45-degree angle out of a hackberry tree and created a really nice licking branch. You know, when guys set up mock scrapes, it's kind of the scenario that they're going for, almost a downward angle branch, and then they set up a scrape underneath there, and almost every deer, doe, or buck that come by there in front of that camera, they would hop up on their hind legs and rub on that branch or reach up. The bigger bucks could just reach up and lick it. So that was giving him a good inventory of the deer that were coming by him, and this double brow tine deer had come by. And I remember talking about that deer with him. We both seen it, and we thought he looked like a pronghorn antelope because all he had left was his bases and his double brows on each side. We confirmed this later on. I had a real close encounter. He came perfectly down a shooting lane after some does had passed. He crossed that fence, and I got some really good close-up video of him, and you can see exactly where his main beams were sheared off right close to the bases, and all he was left with was those two brow tines spaded out. And he looked like a little pronghorn antelope with a huge body, kind of a goofy looking deer. But we saw him a ton that week. He was just crisscrossing the farm multiple times a day, and it would be common for Darren to see him and me to see him in the same morning or afternoon. Said he was really getting his work in. Darren had a few other sightings of some decent deer that we would definitely shoot earlier in the week, and it seemed like maybe the better concentration of movement was toward his end of the farm. But again, I felt like if I just stayed tight to my stand, it would give me a good opportunity if they came across that pond dam. And all you need, hopefully, is just one chance for that deer to do that. Well, we went through the week and didn't really see much as far as what I wanted to see on my stand. And I saw some good groups of ducks come into the pond, so that kept me occupied. Saw some does, saw a few little bucks, but nothing that I was even tempted to shoot at. But really an enjoyable time sitting out. There's some more deer. Okay, so the end of the week rolls around, and Saturday morning is going to be a lot better as far as the weather and the temperature. It's going to finally get a little bit of a cold front, not real significant, but it is going to drop the temperatures down to about freezing, and that's going to spur some movement. So we're pretty excited about Saturday morning. And I had gone out that morning and again didn't really see much, and 10 o'clock rolls around and I decide, well, my wife's home from work. I've been hunting all week long, haven't really seen her or the kids. It's been early mornings, late evenings. I'm just going to run back home real quick, have lunch with them, and then probably go back out for the evening, and I might go sit somewhere else. I'm not feeling real hot on this stand. So that's what I do. I climb down, I tell Darren I'm going to run in for lunch and see what happens then after that. Spend a little time with the family. And I no sooner get home than Darren texts that he shoots his deer. And that's pretty exciting. So I go ahead and grab a quick bite and go run by Casey's, grab a couple of slices of pizza, because I know he's not going to have a chance to grab lunch for a little while we deal with his buck and get some Mountain Dews and head to the farm. And I meet him up on the hay meadow where he parks right off the road. And so we get together, and if you listen to his episode or watch his video, he's got it on YouTube, you can see just how fast this deer came into his stand and how quickly he had to turn around and get a shot. And that would have been his last day to hunt. He was going to head home that evening anyway. So I was super excited that he had a chance to go ahead and fill his tag while he was there. We always use Thanksgiving kind of as our backup time, so he would have had a chance probably to come back up around Thanksgiving a week later and check things out. But I was glad that after a long week he was able to fill his tag. So we dealt with his deer, and that took up most of the afternoon, and that was that. The next day, Darren was going to head home, and I needed to go back to work and get my truck because being absent for a week, I was going to leave my work truck there, but I needed it for the following week because I'd be back on schedule. So we decided I wouldn't go hunting the next morning, and I would just ride down with Darren. It's about a 45-mile drive to work, and he would take me on his way home. I would get my pickup and head back to the house. And I decided that day I'd probably just spend time with my wife and family. Again, after a long week of hunting, not really seeing them. A couple of the kids had a cold, and so it's just every once in a while you just feel like you want to stay home and spend time with your family. And so that's what I decided to do. And we have some house projects going on, and of course I was neglecting that because I was hunting. So I decided, well, I'll spend a little time on the projects and with the family, and then go on from there. And of course then we have Thanksgiving coming up. I'd have a couple days off there that I could go back out and hunt, and weekends or whatever. So, and I hadn't been seeing much. I didn't really have a game plan for either of these stands. I didn't know if I wanted to go right back down to where Darren had shot his deer. Seemed like, after hunting that area for a week, maybe we'd give it a rest. I'd hunted my location for a week straight, maybe give it a rest and just watch the cameras and see what goes on. So anyway, that was the game plan for finishing out the weekend. One of the things that I'd done that was kind of fun, we just started using these cellular cameras, and so you have the apps on your phone and you can watch the deer activity. Well, my wife, she said, well, can I have that app on my phone? I said, yeah, why not? I think that's a good idea. It kind of lets your spouse enter into the whole experience. They get to see the pictures pop up. During the season we have the notifications on, so it's kind of fun to see things just pop up on your phone. Oh, what's that? It's a likelihood at that point that it's going to be a buck. So it's kind of fun and creates more of a family experience. They can kind of buy into what you're doing. And so, yeah, I said, yeah, let's get the Tacticam, the Reveal app on there, and the Spartan app, and you can see what's going on. And, sometimes it's the case that we walk by one of those cameras on the way to or from the stand. And so, especially in the evening when we're heading home, she can kind of see if we walk by one of those cameras, oh, they're coming home from hunting. I know kind of the timeline. So that was kind of fun, and that created a neat experience for her, I think, too. But it's actually really enjoyable for me to know that she was somewhat interested in what I was doing. So she was watching those pictures pop up on her phone. So that afternoon, it was a Sunday afternoon, I wasn't in the stand. I decided, well, this gives me a chance to finally rip out the tub and shower out of our bathroom. We'd had most of our bathroom torn apart. We were going to remodel the whole thing, gut it, and we left it operable up to this point, but it was to the stage where we needed to yank the tub and the shower out, and she was there to watch the kids for me, and I could focus on that. I didn't have any other plans, so I could fill the afternoon with that. I'd kind of waffled on whether I should go out to the stand or not. The cold front had kind of settled in, but again, I decided not to. I wanted to spend time with the family and get a few things done before I had to get back to work. Well, every once in a while you have experiences that happen, and whether it's an event, a news event, or something that happens, and you remember exactly where you were and what time it was when that happened. And this is one of those cases. So I was down on my knees, filthy, in the bathroom, trying to get this tub and shower combo pulled out of the wall, and it popped up off the floor. And I hear from the other room, Justine says, "You've got to be kidding me." I was like, oh no, what's this? And at first I thought it was something with the kids. She comes around the corner holding her phone and shows me her phone, and it's the Spartan camera at 3:26 in the afternoon. I'm not in the stand that I was hunting all week long, and that big heavy 8-point had gone right by the pond dam. He would have gone right through the shooting lane. Oh man, that made me sick to my stomach. I didn't know what to do. But of course, it's too late to really do anything at that point. You're not out there. So I did debate whether I should hop in the truck and run out and try to get to Darren's location. He was taking a eastward trajectory there. Thought, well, maybe he'll go by one of those stands that Darren was sitting in. But, well, at that time of day, it's kind of too late to do anything. So I decided I'd just pout real heavily the rest of the day and move on with life. But again, after a couple weeks, about a week and a half, Thanksgiving rolled around, and that gave me another chance to get out to the woods. And that Thanksgiving morning I went out. It was getting real cool at that point, and didn't really see anything. I had elected to sit on one of the, I think it was the Green Gate stand there, so I could watch that scrape. And Licking Branch, we still had good pictures from that location, and that heavy 8-point had come in there multiple times, got some really good pictures of him. In fact, he bedded down in that scrape. He had nose to the air, just some really good pictures right there. And that would have been about a 30-yard shot from the Green Gate stand. So I elected to go to that stand in the morning of Thanksgiving. And then, of course, get down and go home and eat a good heavy lunch. And then I was going to go back out. Well, I didn't see what I wanted to Thanksgiving morning, but halfway across the property, we had a couple fields that we had planted to rye for the cattle to eat during the winter, so they could graze that. And that was about the only green food that I could think of around. There wasn't very many wheat fields on the neighbors, so I thought, well, perhaps the does are going to hit that. It's cooled down enough. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe the does will go over there, and these bucks will head that direction and check them out. So my afternoon plan was to go out early, go to this lower rye field, scout it out, find a spot to sit, whether it be on the ground or there were a couple stands close by that I could maybe get off the tree and move to a location there on that field edge. So I walk out there, kind of scout the field edge real slow. I didn't see any good sign that I wanted to see, but other than tracks of deer that were feeding in that field. And then I kind of determined that it was going to be too tough of a job to grab the stand that I wanted to and get it moved. I couldn't find a good tree to set it in anyway, so I thought, well, I'll sit on the ground tucked up underneath a cedar tree. And once I found a spot to do that, then I didn't feel like I had a shot where I anticipated the deer to come out of the creek bottom into that field. There were a couple heavier trails and creek crossings that I knew that the deer had used in previous times, and they were tracked up pretty heavily, and I wasn't going to have a good shot from the spot that I'd chosen that offered some concealment. So I thought, man, I don't know what to do. Now I've wasted a good hour and a half dealing with this, trying to figure out where I want to set up. I thought, well, forget that. I'm just going to go sit on this top field. There's a field now, I've kind of named it the Knob, and it's a field that we've purposely put a food plot in this year. It's one of the first food plots that I feel like we've actually had some success with as far as getting something established in a timely manner and getting rain and all that. So it's up and ready to go, and a few does are hitting it this year. But last year, there was nothing up on that field. There was a little bit of some volunteer, probably rye, coming up in there, but not much. It was pretty bare in a fallow field. I thought, well, I'm just going to go up and sit on that stand. At least then I won't be down in the middle of the property messing around anymore. I'll just sit up there and kind of enjoy the evening, I guess. It was really, really nice weather, not too cold. So I get up there, sit up in the stand, and it's not real long into the sit. Again, I've wasted quite a bit of time, so it's getting close to prime time in the evening. And it's not real long before I hear something back behind me to my left. I look over my shoulder, and there's a little buck coming up the hill behind me. And he's a half rack. He might have 3 points on the side that he didn't break off, but that's okay. So he's meandering around, munching on buck brush, and kind of messing around on the pasture side of the fence. And it's not too long after that, I hear something directly to my left, again in the pasture, and another little 8 points coming up the hill from that direction. I thought, well, man, this is all right. I'm seeing something. So I get the video camera fired up and start videoing them and get some real good video of those two bucks. I'm kind of worried about them getting my scent. There's not much of a breeze, and I've been walking around, so I got kind of sweaty, and I was just worried about them busting me out of there. But anyway, it is what it is at that point, and they weren't too big, so if they busted out, not much loss. I will add that in this spot, we've always had some like trophy rocks and salt lick right up there on that field edge. We have a camera there, and Dad had been putting out buckets of corn, so that's probably why these bucks were coming in, and probably why deer were just checking this area out anyway. But it always seemed like we had deer showing up there kind of randomly, even without crops. But anyway, so I have these 2 bucks kind of meandering around. They start to nibble at the corn and make their way out to the field, and I don't know what they're eating, but they're browsing on something there in the field. Well, the spot that we have to kind of watch is right off to my right and kind of behind. There's a thick draw full of cedar trees and hackberries and stuff like that. Pretty sharp angled hillsides dropping down, and there's usually some does bedded down in there, but it's also the area that when deer come across the road from the neighbors, they drop into that really quickly. So it offers quick cover as they're transitioning properties, and then they will filter out from that. And it's typical for them to come up to this knob on top of the hill and then mess around there before they move on. So the stand is really set up kind of for that purpose. Well, I keep feeling like I hear something down in that bottom. So I'm just focusing really hard. I can't tell if it's a squirrel. It almost sounds like a deer. So I'm watching that pretty closely. And I see a few does come filtering up just like we'd anticipate, and they get in front of me and my view is blocked by, there's a little Osage orange tree there and some cedar trees. So my view is kind of blocked at that point. So I'm not sure what all's out there, but I knew there were a couple does. Well, pretty soon I hear what I think is a grunt. I'm like, okay, that I gotta focus on that. That sounds really good. So I'm focusing on this trail that kind of angles up toward me from that bottom, and I see antlers just coming up this trail. So I throw up the binos and I look at this deer, and I immediately recognize him as a 10 point that we'd seen, but he'd broken off his G2 on one side. So he's missing that tine, and you know, Darren had seen him earlier in the week. We had pictures of him, and I'd already decided that I wasn't going to shoot that deer. But it was really cool to recognize that he was coming. So I get the binoculars down. I don't even focus on my bow at that point. I focus on the camera, and this buck comes in and he gives me some really great footage right at the bottom of the stand. He comes right around that cedar tree, and he's probably 3 steps from the base of the tree stand. And when he's working his way up the field edge toward me, one of those young bucks, I think it's the half rack one, comes over kind of to meet him, and then he gets on my scent trail, the young buck does, and follows it right to the base of the stand. So he's kind of stepping around, not real spooky, but he's trying to figure things out. He's sniffing the bottom of the stand, and then this bigger buck comes right behind him, and he's kind of bristled up. He's checking out these younger bucks, trying to kind of keep them in order. So he pauses right there at the bottom of the stand real close, and I get some really good video. He messes around at the field, checks the corn pile real quick, and works his way out across the field toward the does. A vehicle comes by not long after that and spooks everything out of the field, and so I use that opportunity to get down even during daylight and exit the field. I didn't want to wait until dark and chance having more deer come in and then spook everything off of there. I've done that too many times in the past, and with this deer close by, I thought, well, this is a good opportunity. They've ran over the hill down into our property, into the valley. This will give me a good opportunity to get it back out of the stand and get out of here without spooking anything further. Vehicles will usually run the deer off the field, but they don't spook too hard, and they'll usually reappear fairly quickly. So I get down, and the way I exit that field, it kind of takes me along the top of the hill, and I could see down into the field that I had originally wanted to set up in, and one of those younger bucks and this bigger buck were both down there feeding on the green, and that gave me some comfort. I was pretty happy that they'd settled down that quickly and were focusing on eating and getting settled back in. So I just leave, I go back to the house, I show Darren and Dad and everybody else, whoever I can talk into watching the video footage, show it all to them, and we kind of celebrate that. And I kind of figured that that was my last hunt. After Thanksgiving weekend, things get busy again, and I've taken my vacation days, so We really don't have a good opportunity. We don't typically go rifle hunting, and just because we don't have a ton of time to do that. So I kind of figured that was my last hurrah as far as that goes. But we kept getting some decent deer showing up on our cameras. And there was another 10 point that I don't think Darren or I either one of us saw in person. I know I didn't. He might have one of those weeks that he was up, but it would have been a really solid deer, a definite shooter. And he was showing up on one of our cameras pretty regularly toward the east end of the property. And I was trying to figure out kind of what his pattern might be, if he was on certain winds or what the case might be. But regardless, he was being consistent every couple days showing up on that camera. In fact, multiple cameras at that point. So I thought, well, if I do have a chance, I'm going to focus on that green gate stand that he's coming by, and hopefully he'll come by and I'll get a chance at him. So between that heavy 8 that I didn't have any other encounters with and this 10 point, I had a few deer that were possibles. Well, it just so happened that after Thanksgiving, my family ended up getting sick. You know, a lot of illness being passed around those years. And so my wife works at the school, the kids are at school, and the policy was that they had to take time off, and at least 10 days or something like that they had to be off. And then my work also said that since I was exposed and possibly contagious, that I was to take time off as well. Well, that got into my head a little bit. I thought, well, shoot, I got a week off now that I can go hunting. But my wife and the kids were really not feeling very good. So I behaved myself for about 5 days. But rifle season started that Wednesday in the middle of that. And by Saturday, I'd either bugged Justine enough that she relented, or she was actually feeling well enough to let me sneak out to the woods and give it a go. So I was pumped. I was like, man, this is great. I'm gonna get a chance to go out, and as much as I want to shoot deer with my bow, it's like I'm not gonna let an opportunity pass. I'm gonna take the gun too, so I can. It's okay for us to take both. My tag is for either season, any weapon. And so I thought, I'm going to take my bow, but I'm also going to take the gun. I've not shot a deer with my 30-06. I've got a Thompson Center bolt action 30-06 rifle, and I have not shot anything with it, and I would really be excited to do that. So I'm going to take that to the stand too, just in case one of these target deer comes by and they are out of range for the bow. But I really want to make the bow shot a priority. So I sit on the green gate stand where these bucks had most of their pictures and seemed to still be showing up in that general area. I get in, sneak in. It's a really nice morning, cold, and just everything's setting up just right. I got the camera set up. I am ready to go. Just right at daybreak, so the sun is just kind of coming up over the hill. I see a deer moving in through the bottom, and it's an area where deer do move, but not the majority of the deer. And it's kind of following my track in. I see this deer, and you can just tell by the way a big buck moves, an old buck moves, that they're a mature buck. And he's coming in, and I'm like, man, that's an old buck. I got to get ready. So I pop the camera on, get it focused on him. I don't zoom in, unfortunately. I wish I would have, for the sake of all this. But if he follows how he's coming, he's quartering hard toward me. There's a fence crossing there that if he hops that, it'll put him on a trail right in front of me, an easy 20-yard shot if he's moving past in front of the tree stand. So at that point, I'm thinking I'm going to get a shot with my bow. I'm going to get the camera set on him. I'm not going to zoom in because at a close range shot, I don't want to have it zoomed in too far. I'm going to have to pan the camera over and try to get a shot lined up. All of this is trying to play out in my mind how this is going to happen. I'm going to have to get my bow down when he hops the fence or when he passes behind a little cedar tree. Get the bow down and get ready to draw, all kind of in this fine moment. But as big bucks often do, I don't really think he sensed anything wrong, but they're just so cautious and they don't cooperate very well. He stops in that creek bottom on the flat before he even crosses the fence. He's not really even sensing anything that I can tell, but he just pauses for a little bit, gives his little tail a flick, turns hard to his left, and takes an alternate trail up the hill. So at that point, it's gun time. So I grab the gun off the hook and get ready for a shot. But as soon as he takes that hard left, there is no shot opportunity. The trees are too thick there, and I just cannot get on him. I can't see him through the scope of the rifle. I feel like there's a chance as he moves across another opening that I would have a shot, but I don't pick up on him until he's clear up behind me, basically silhouetted on the top of the hill. So it wouldn't have been a safe shot had I been able to get on him with the gun. At that point, I'm using the binoculars. I confirm that it is the big heavy 8-point that I was after, and he moves south and out of my life. Well, such a really cool encounter, but there's just nothing I could do at that point. There's just no way I could get on him. And so it was really heartbreaking. And early in the morning, so I sit out the rest of the day and see a little bit of activity, but nothing to write home about. So I get down and I'm kind of bummed out, but with that encounter, I feel like it's worth hunting hard kind of the rest of the season. So I really want to make it a priority to do all that I can to catch up with one of these deer. I get a few more chances at that stand, and I have some good encounters. There's a buck that has a young deer, has double split G2s. Get some good video of him, have a nice encounter. Not a shot opportunity, but I would have passed him anyway. He wasn't a deer that we were really focusing on. I see that broke G2 10-point a time or two again, and kind of confirms where he's hanging out, and that kind of enables us to, well, Darren found his sheds later on after the end of the season, so that gave us some good knowledge, I guess, where he was going to be. And then this kind of brings me to the very last day of the season. So after rifle season's done, the rest of December is open again to bow season, and I was going to hit that hard if I could on weekends and so forth. Well, and then the other thing is I have the opportunity to take off between Christmas and New Year's, so nobody's going into work. So if I want to take vacation days that time, the shop's closed anyway, and so it's a good opportunity again to take vacation. So I was going to capitalize on that and see what I could do. But at that point, kind of our camera information was starting to drop off a little bit, and wasn't sure what I was going to see. Well, one of those days, I think it was probably Christmas Eve or the day after Christmas, we needed to run some calves through the corral and give some shots and that sort of thing. So I was going to help Dad do that. So I was already out at the farm, and once we get done with the calves, I see a notification on one of the camera apps. So I check it, and a totally new buck had gone by the green gate stand, and he had points all over his head. I couldn't believe what that deer was. Kind of hard to judge. Again, he was quartering away, so kind of hard to see exactly what he was, but he was down there during daylight hours when we were messing around with the calves, and probably would have had a chance at him. But he was a totally new deer that we hadn't had any pictures or hadn't had any encounters with. So that was really cool. And then I have a few days left, and the very last day of December, well, here's another thing that developed. In the west pasture, I'd kind of laid low, didn't hunt that at all because we didn't have any recent information out there. But we did have another 10-point that had long tines, a new deer, show up right the last few days of December. I thought, well, he's borderline a shooter. He's got good tall tines, not real super wide, but perhaps he's something I want to go after. and a new buck, so fair game, I guess. So I go and get set up, get ready to go out to that pasture, and I decided to use a little bit of corn to try to solidify the shot. I knew where they were moving through, and we have a mineral lick there, but I thought, well, I'll toss some corn out, and he'd been paired up with another 8-point, and thought, well, that'll stop him long enough for me to hopefully get a shot at him. Very last day of season. It's super windy, and we've got kind of a northwest, or the forecast is for kind of a northwest wind, which was working for an alternate stand, not the one on the pond dam, but one a little further west that I like to sit on. The stand that I'd shot my 2020 buck out of. So I'm going to sit on that stand and watch this corn pile, and I felt like I accessed it really well because you have to walk through where all the cattle are, so it kind of conceals your noise and that sort of thing getting into the pasture. Get set up. The wind is really stiff, kind of out of the northwest. That's what it feels like. That's what it was supposed to be. And sure enough, right as the sun starts to set, I catch movement coming from the west directly toward me. Throw up the binoculars, and yep, it's this tall 10. But man, this is perfect. He's going to come right in, and I'm going to get a shot. But he is acting so nervous. There's kind of the strong wind, which I feel like kind of sets the deer on edge a little bit. And then for whatever reason, these calves that are just across the fence are bawling like crazy. So they're making a ruckus. And this 8-point eventually shows up that was running with him. And both of them just act super nervous. Now the 10-point, he seemed like he was fairly well committed to coming on in, but the 8-point just gets really nervous and doesn't really spook hard, but he takes a turn to the south and gets out of there, and he takes the 10-point with him. So they move on up the hill. I get a little bit of video with them, but they're gone. I almost get out of the stand at that point, but then I catch some movement to my left, back behind me toward the pond, and I see this fork G2 deer coming in. So I get him on video, and that was a different young 10-point. Again, not a deer that we were going to shoot, but a nice up-and-comer. So I get video of him, and he gets real antsy when he gets kind of perpendicular to me. And then I kind of realized that the wind was not out of the northwest like they had forecasted. It's more out of the northeast or straight north, which was taking my scent kind of right down to where those deer were. So I think that's another reason they were kind of all on edge and spooking out of there. So once that deer and the does that were with him spooked out of there, I decided that's enough. That's the end of my season. I get down and head to the house. Fortunately, I didn't spook them too bad because they showed back up on that camera that evening, just within the hour of when I got down. But that was the conclusion of my 2021 season. I've got to jump back to my rifle/bow encounter. Oh, there's another deer in a cornfield with that heavy 8-point. And it was really funny. So that Saturday morning, I had this encounter, and I get back to the house, and again, family is pretty invested in all of this too. You know, I include them. We go on deer drives together, scouting, and I talk to them constantly about it. And so the girls know what's up, and so Harper, our oldest daughter, she greets me that morning, and she says, "Hey, Daddy, did you get a deer?" I said, "Well, no." She said, "Oh, you didn't see anything?" I said, "Yeah, I saw a buck." "Oh, it wasn't big enough?" Because they know I'm waiting for a bigger deer. It's like, "Yeah, it was big." "Oh, and it just didn't stop? It didn't stop walking?" It's like, "No, it stopped." And at that point, she was pretty much done with me. She was disgusted. She's like, "Oh, Dad's no hunter. He doesn't know what's going on." So she just walks away. I felt that was pretty funny. Sometimes you get pretty humbled by your own kids and feel pretty silly, but had to explain then and show her the reason why Daddy didn't get a good shot at that deer and why we didn't have a deer to go recover that morning. But all in all, even though I didn't get a deer last year, it was one of my favorite seasons, probably the most I've been able to sit out in a tree stand with purpose and actually having some decent encounters or getting some good video and gathering a little bit of information on these deer. It was just a blast. Set up so much anticipation for this year and this coming season. We've got some really decent deer on camera. Again, we're gonna have to see them in person to make a real clear judgment. I'm excited. I think that double brow buck that had busted his beams off last year, I think he's shown some real improvement this year. Huge body on that deer. He's put on quite a few points and a lot more mass on his beams, so hopefully he doesn't shear them off again this year. So far, the bigger deer that we were after, we actually haven't got any pictures of those that we can confirm, possibly real early on before they were developed in velvet. So it'll be exciting to see if any of those guys show up. I'm still pretty high on them. Sometimes the big deer don't show up on camera anyway, but the fact that they were pretty regular and seemed pretty comfortable toward the end of season gives me some hope that they like to hang around. Oh, there's a nice deer out there in the weeds. I'm getting close to the farm where these bale feeders are. And oh man, there's some nice thick cover over here. And I think that was a pretty nice deer. Anyway, well, I'm gonna let you guys go. And hopefully we have a couple more stories coming up here in the next few weeks. But surely Darren and I'll scare something up when we get together for Rutcation 2022 and Deer Week 2022. I'm super excited, so hopefully we can make it happen.